Yes, sir. Well, it's a very important question, but let us not run past securing the border, not closing the border, securing the border. The question was, a lot of politicians are talking about closing the border, but what happens after we do that? What do we do with the illegal immigrants that are here? And I will come to that question, but let us not run past the necessity of securing the border, because how long have we been talking about this? 25 years. For 25 years, we have been arguing about the security of the border. It's not because we haven't spent money, we have. But once again, it is an example, frankly, of ineptitude. What does it take to secure a border? And by the way, a country that cannot secure its border cannot protect its sovereignty. A country is defined by its borders. So, we actually have to secure the border, and that's the point. Talking about it doesn't get it done. You know, there are very fine public servants. So I do not mean to cast aspersions on all politicians, but if we are honest with ourselves, the business of politics is words. Words don't secure a border. Words don't solve the problems. Words don't produce results. And so we've had lots of words about securing the border. What does it take to secure a border? It takes money, it takes manpower, it takes technology, but mostly, apparently, it takes political willpower and a leader who understands what it takes to translate words into results. That's what we need to do, so let's not walk past it. We have to secure the border. Second, what do we also do? We have to fix the legal immigration system. How long have we been talking about this? 25 years. The legal immigration system contributes to the illegal immigration problem. Because just as one example, over our Mexican border, we hand out Mexican border crossing cards every day. Therefore, a daily pass into the United States, we don't really check whether people come home. You can come here to this country on a temporary visa, and we don't really ever check whether you leave. So half the people who are here illegally came on a legal visa and overstayed, and there is no consequence. We don't have an employer verification system that's reliable enough to make it mandatory. For heaven's sakes, we are the most sophisticated technological nation on the planet. Do you really think we can't create an employer verification system that works? Of course we can. But if you have inept management and no one ever really willing to challenge the status quo and say, you know what, you're not getting your job done, we got to give it to somebody who can, that's what happens in the government. No one's ever held to account, honestly, and it never gets done. So we have to fix the legal immigration system. We have to secure the border. We're letting the wrong people in, we're sending the wrong people home. And it is then, because only when we do these basic things that all the fundamental responsibility of the federal government are the American people going to believe that the federal government is competent. Why should you trust that the federal government can do a big, complicated, controversial thing, like decide what to do with illegal immigrants, if government can't do the basics? Like secure the border and fix a legal immigration system. Part of the reason we must start with these things is not just because they're vital, but because we need to restore people's faith in the basic competence and responsiveness of our government, in which people have lost faith. My own view, if you have come here illegally and you have stayed here illegally, you never get to earn a path to citizenship. Because I know too many people who have done it the right way. I know too many people, and you do as well, who've learned our history, who've taken the tests, who've raised their hand, who've expressed the oath. You cannot say to those people, never mind. There is no consequence for playing by the rules, and there is no consequence for not playing by the rules. Perhaps some of these folks may earn some temporary status so that they can work temporarily in this country, but we cannot simply say, never mind, let's let all these people who are here just stay and become citizens. We undermine what's right in this country if we do that. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Carly. I'm a mom of 4 boys. And
About to have a girl. Woohoo!
2 weeks before the caucuses, we're finally getting a Republican woman. We're very excited. But I have 2 questions for you. The internet is a very scary place for a mom, and my boys have Kindles, they don't have smartphones yet.
is an increasing problem. Look, let's be honest, I'm a big believer in technology because technology is a wonderful tool. But let us also be honest and say that the internet has become a place that appeals to the worst instincts of the human race. You can do everything terrible and bad on the internet, whether it's online gambling. Gambling is addictive. And why are we making it so easy? The level of sex and violence and addictive behavior that's available freely on the internet today should be something that worries us. This is about the culture of our nation. So I'm not saying let's have some gigantic government regulation because they never really achieve their ends. But what I am saying is we must have a well-lit marketplace on the internet, just as we have a well-lit marketplace in the mall. We can't continue to believe that somehow all the rules that don't apply to the internet should apply to a brick and mortar. You would never let your teenager wander into an X-rated porn shop. But we let our teenagers because we don't have some basic rules that would define a well-lit marketplace. And I also think we need to have a fundamental conversation in this country about the level of violence that exists, especially after some of these mass shootings. More gun control isn't the answer. Everything the Democrats propose wouldn't have prevented a single one of these tragedies. But we ought to be having a conversation in this country about what are we doing to ensure that people who are mentally disturbed get the treatment they need. My husband and I buried a daughter to the demons of addiction. So I'm keenly aware of the cost, the toll on our communities and our families of addictive behaviors, whether it's drugs or alcohol or gambling. And I'm also keenly aware that we are underinvesting in the treatment of mental illness in this nation. But every time one of these tragedies happens, what we need to say, what we need to have a conversation about is these are very troubled young men. In every case, somebody knew they were in trouble. Somebody knew these people were a danger to themselves or others, and yet nobody intervened. We've got to be talking about why. And we also have to be talking about the fact that every single one of these troubled young men would descend into that world on the internet and fill their lives with images of violence, hour after hour after hour. And if we do not think that has an impact on a troubled young mind, then we are not being honest with ourselves. So I talk often about, I think among other things that are at stake in this nation is the character of our nation. And so I am so dismayed when every time we have one of these tragedies, progressive politicians leap to the microphone and call out one more idea for gun control, none of which will work, but will not have a conversation about mental illness, about violence in our culture, and about how we actually recognize the reality of what's going on the internet and have a well-lit marketplace where we understand what's happening. And by the way, of course, as you know, government can do nothing that an involved parent can do better. So all of the parents have to be equipped. Which is a segue to Common Core. Common Core is a really bad idea. Why? Why is Common Core a bad idea? Well, let's look at some facts. The Department of Education has gotten bigger and bigger and spent more and more money for 50 years. Is the quality of our education better? No. In fact, it's worse. In fact, the disparity between low-income children's achievement and high-income children's achievement has gotten worse over the last 20 years, not better. What does that lead you to conclude? Spending more money at the Department of Education in Washington, D.C. doesn't have a lot to do with the quality of education in this country. In fact, we're spending money in Washington that we could be spending somewhere else. What does have an impact on a child's education? We know the answer to this. A good teacher and an involved parent. That's what has to do with So every single policy that I will pursue starts with, does this help us have more good teachers in the front of the classroom, and does this help our parents become more involved? And you know what helps good teachers and involved parents? Choice. 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 Homeschooling, charter schooling, voucher schools, magnet schools. Parents must have a choice, and they also must have the ability to say, you know what? This school, this teacher is failing my child, and so I'm taking my child someplace else. There's some very innovative programs. Nevada has one where literally parents own federal, state funding for education, so that parents not only have a choice about where to send their kids to school, but they also have the resources to help them make those choices. When parents lack choices, kids lack chances. What is Common Core, really? It's a big bureaucratic program rolling out of Washington, D.C., however it was intended. However it started, what it's turned into is a big bureaucratic program that tells teachers how to teach and students how to learn. By the way, the textbook companies are involved in those standards, the testing companies are involved. Why? Because it's their business, and they have an interest in how that business goes, right? So they're involved. The Democrats are on the wrong side of this issue, and we need to make this clear. You know, let me pause just for a moment and tell you a little story. Maybe 2 or 3 months ago, I was on the show, the television program, The View. Not a Republican primary audience, generally, but we have to talk to people who don't yet know they agree with us. And to win an election in 2016, we have to talk to everybody. And there are a lot of things we do agree on. And in the course of this interview, I was having a great time. You know, I like Whoopi Goldberg's movies, it's not her politics. And Rosie Perez is a charming woman. And we were having this great conversation. She was fascinated that I knew Vladimir Putin, and she was asking me about that. And sort of midway through the conversation, she says, you know, Carly, I really like you. I'm not a Republican. I said, wow, Rosie, I'm shocked. I would never have guessed that. Why are you? Why are you? And we actually have to answer that question to win in 2016. And so I said this, because I know that no one of us is any better than any other one of us. Each of us are gifted by God. All of us have potential. Every one of us can live a life of dignity and purpose and meaning. And I know our values and our principles and our policies work better to lift everyone up. Progressives don't believe this. They believe some are smarter than others, and some are better than others, and some are going to take care of others, and some are going to decide for others. Now, what does this have to do with education? As proof of what I have just said, which is a harsh assessment, I take you to the head of the Chicago Public Teachers Union, who, when they were striking against teacher accountability in the classroom, how can you strike against accountability in the classroom? The teachers unions all over the country are doing it. She said, we cannot be held accountable for the performance of students in our classroom because too many of them are poor and come from broken families. So what was she saying? If you're poor and you come from a broken family, you can't learn, and we don't need to teach you. Guess what, ladies and gentlemen? That is not what I believe, that is not what you believe, and that is not the United States of America. Yes, sir. So the question was, talk about servant leadership and working horizontally, not vertically. What a great question. So what is a servant leader? A servant leader, as I tried to imply a little bit earlier, a servant leader is someone who understands what leadership actually is. Leadership is not about lording your title over others. It is not about throwing your weight around. It is not about beating your chest and talking about how great you are. The highest calling of a leader is to unlock potential in others. And the way you unlock a potential in any situation, the way you resolve long, unresolved problems is not by ordering them to be solved. That's what vertical is. You know, do it because I said so. There are a couple of candidates who are used to saying that, but you know, it doesn't work. It's not do it because I said so, and it isn't trust me, I'm just going to get done. You have to work with others. So let me give you two examples of working horizontally that are critically important to resolve these issues in our government. Number one, I will work with Congress. I talked about the fact that we have become a nation of rules, not a nation of laws. We have rules just flowing out all the time. So I've asked Congress, and I will, as President of the United States, encourage Congress, use capital to get past something called the REINS Act. The REINS Act gives Congress the authority to oversee any new regulation. You cannot have the federal government just rolling out rules without the people's representatives having some say over them. Our federal government, of course, was created as the ultimate in horizontal leadership. We have three co-equal branches of government. Of course, President Obama has rolled out all these lawless rules, so I will start by rolling them back, but then we have to put in place the systematic reforms that give Congress an equal say in what happens. But here's another important example of horizontal leadership. I'm going to rely on all of you, because Congress sometimes needs, let us face it, huge pressure to act. Congress frequently doesn't get around to doing much of anything because it's hard. And you know, to challenge the status quo and solve a problem that's been festering for a long time, what inevitably happens? You make enemies, right? Because somebody's ox gets gored, somebody's interest gets challenged, and that's hard to do. So Congress needs some pressure from who? You, citizens. So one of the things I believe we must do is go to some version of zero-based budgeting in the federal government. We have no idea where our money is being spent. And that is why the federal government spends more money each and every year and never has enough money to do the important things. Have you ever noticed that? They spend more money every year, but we don't have enough money to secure the border. We don't have enough money to, answer taxpayer questions. The reason they spend more money every year and never have enough money is because we don't know where the money is being spent. And when we have appropriations hearings in Washington, D.C., they never talk about the whole budget. They only talk about the increase over last year's budget. So we have had 50 years of spending that we never actually examine. So to get zero-based budgeting done where every agency has to justify every single dollar, every single year, that's the only way you spend less and invest in the important priorities, will require citizenship. And so I'm going to ask you to help me get that done, to apply pressure onto Congress. How many of you still own a flip phone? Okay, you must upgrade. You have 15 months. This is fair warning. Why must you upgrade? I'm being very serious, folks. I'm going to go into the Oval Office once a week, weekly radio address. I'm going to ask you to take out your smartphones. I will ask you a question. Do you think it's important that we know where your money is being spent? Do you think we should go to some version of zero-based budgeting so that we have to justify every dollar, not just new dollars? Please press 1 on your keypad for yes, press 2 for no. This technology exists. We use it for silly, frivolous things. Technology is a tool that can be used to re-engage citizens in the process of their government. Technology is the most powerful tool for democratization ever devised. We need to use it to re-engage citizens once again in the process of their government and put pressure on the political class to move. That is horizontal collaboration. That, I hope, you would agree, is servant leadership. The people's house needs to do their job and be engaged in what they should be engaged in. But citizens have to step forward and, with me, take our government back.
What is your remedy for
Obamacare. So, we all know it's bad, but I want to explain why it's bad. Because we have to explain to win. We have to explain to win. Obamacare was written in large part by drug companies and health insurance companies. Why? Because they wanted to be sure they understood how the game was going to be played for them. This is called crony capitalism, folks. And Obamacare, between the law and the regulations, is literally tens upon tens upon tens of thousands of pages long, which means no one understands it, and no one has read it. And so what do you see happening already? You see health insurance companies consolidating. They're trying to bulk up to deal with this huge new bulk in the federal government. You see drug companies consolidating. They're trying to bulk up to deal with big, powerful, complicated government. You need to be big and powerful. So they're bulking up. And meanwhile, how are people being served? Emergency room visits are up over 50% in some places. Health insurance premiums are up over 40%. We have small businesses saying, I can't grow because I can't afford to do this. We have people saying, you know what, I have a less satisfying, more expensive health insurance plan than I did before Obamacare. And meanwhile, by the way, we are throwing more and more people into Medicaid. That is a program that is increasingly insolvent, and fewer doctors are accepting payments from that program. So are we actually helping poor people? No, we're not. We're setting them up for a fall. So, Obamacare has to be repealed. And in its place, I would do three things. Number one, let states manage high-risk pools. There are people who truly need help. I'm a cancer survivor. I understand, in deeply personal terms. You cannot have a family bankrupted by a pre-existing condition. And there are people who truly need a helping hand. But the closer we move money and decision-making to the people who are impacted by it, the more accountable those decisions become. That's why all the things that should be done in the states should be done in the states, not in Washington, D.C. Second, let's try the one thing we have never tried in health insurance. What have we never tried? The free market. Health insurance has been, let us be honest, a cozy little game between regulators and health insurance companies for 100 years. We used to play it on a state basis. So the regulators in a state, Iowa, California, Texas, New Hampshire, Georgia, the regulators in the state would get together with the insurance companies in that state. And what would they do? They'd lay out the rules of competition. They'd say, you know, I was a small state. You only get 3 or 4 of you who can compete here. We did that on a statewide basis. And what did Obamacare do really? It just nationalized that game. We have now one gigantic, it's called a regulated oligopoly, but it's one gigantic deal between regulators and health insurance companies. By the way, who permitted pre-existing conditions not to be covered? Regulators and health insurance companies. This is how socialism starts, ladies and gentlemen. Government creates a problem, and then government steps in to solve the problem. And that's what we have with Obamacare. So let us try the one thing we never tried, the free market, where actually health insurance companies, no matter who they are, no matter where they are, they have to compete for your business. I come from the technology industry. It is the most hyper-competitive, least regulated industry in the world. And what have you come to expect from the technology industry? Better products, better prices, greater feature function, year after year after year. Last, the federal government should do one important thing. The federal government should mandate, and I don't use that term lightly in association with the federal government, the federal government should mandate that every healthcare provider publish on a regular basis its costs, its prices, and its outcomes. Because, ladies and gentlemen, as consumers of healthcare, we have no idea. You don't know whether the hospital down the street is better or worse than the hospital in the next town over. You don't know whether an ambulatory clinic has greater outcomes at lower prices than your hospital down the street. You don't know that the senior citizens home that you're thinking about putting your parents in is better than the one down there. We don't know. And so here is something that's so incredibly important to each and every one of us, and it is a black box. And oh, by the way, the government has reimbursed for so long on the basis of cost, not outcome. Then what's the consequence of that? When you reimburse on cost, what do you get? Higher cost. Because there's no incentive to get better. There's only incentive to take in more money. Those are all things that can be done. They need to be done. But we're going to have to explain them to the American people so that people understand Obamacare, although the goals were lofty and we all agreed, let's help people. Let's make sure everybody has access to quality, affordable health care. Yes, amen. But this is not the way to do it.
Everything you say, I have two more questions. First of all, I want to tell you that using CAR-T methods to grow babies and cell bodies is not pro-woman, period. First of all, I want to thank you for very on that issue. And with this whole debacle about the Republicans are going to shut down government, public actors, you've been very clear on that. And my question is, if you are president, do they want to not do their job and just continue the resolution? Can a president deal to continue the resolution?
Well, it's an interesting constitutional question, but first of all, I don't know if you could hear all of that, but I'm sure you saw the Planned Parenthood protesters outside. And, you know, I frequently have Planned Parenthood protesters who come up to me and say I'm anti-woman. Really? Planned Parenthood has never denied that they are engaging in late-term abortion for the purpose of harvesting body parts because they cannot deny it. It is true. And whether you are pro-life or pro-choice, and I am pro-life, this is about the character of our nation. This is about the character of our nation. We cannot be a nation that condones this. And how interesting that just a couple days ago, Planned Parenthood announced they weren't going to take reimbursement anymore for the harvesting of body parts. Wow, that's quite an admission, isn't it? When I am President of the United States, I will insist that Congress pass a budget, not a continuing resolution. I will propose a budget that balances our budget within a decade, and every budget I propose will not include a dime of funding for Planned Parenthood. This, by the way, is another topic. Look at all the women who stood up. Thank you, by the way, as well as to the men. But this is another topic that we need to educate Americans on, because Planned Parenthood, along with the media, has managed to convince a lot of people of things that are not true. Most Americans think Planned Parenthood conducts mammograms. They do not. Most Americans are unaware of the fact that Planned Parenthood is a political operation, that it funnels millions of dollars in political donations to pro-abortion candidates. Most people don't know that. I confronted a Planned Parenthood protester at a football game, and I said, well, how do you feel about taxpayer funding? Forget the abortions for a moment. How do you feel about taxpayer funding being used to funnel political contributions to pro-abortion candidates? That's not true, she said. Oh yes, it is true. Go check your facts. And we all ought to be quite worried about how the mainstream media just bought Planned Parenthood's fiction without a lot of questioning. So, yes ma'am.
I'm a military mom, and I recently was very disturbed by the story of the officer in Afghanistan who voted because and was being sexually abused. And that's really, well, my son's been to Afghanistan, and, you know, when our soldiers go over there, you know, they are on military bases run by the United States. However,
So she's a military mom, thank you for that service. Let us start with the fundamental truth that members of our military no longer feel respected and valued by this administration. And that's a real shame. That's a stain on our nation's character. How can they feel valued and respected when the rules of engagement, which is what you're talking about now, literally demote someone for living out American values in every conceivable way? How can they feel valued when moms like you are sending pillows and blankets and MREs to their sons fighting in Afghanistan? Not chocolate chip cookies, the basics. How can they feel respected when this president, who has no trouble adding EPA administrators to roll out and administer all these rules, but says he has to lay off 40,000 soldiers? How can they feel respected when 18 months after the debacle at the Arizona VA, where we learned that veterans died before receiving an appointment, and we then learned that bureaucrats had cooked the books so nobody would find out, and when the American people reacted with outrage and Congress passed a bill that said we could fire the top 400 senior executives of the VA for dereliction of duty, by the way, pretty good idea, we ought to apply it all throughout government. What happened? One person was fired, and we learned, sadly, a month and a half ago that over 300,000 veterans have died before they received health care. This is an unbelievable stain on our honor. So let me start by saying this. We must honor and serve and respect and care for those who serve and fight for us. And that means a couple things. Number one, we have got to get the VA under control from top to bottom. Number two, we have to have the strongest military on the face of the planet, and everybody has to know it. The finest fighting force the world has ever seen. And when I say finest, I don't just mean the most sophisticated, I don't just mean the most lethal. I mean of the highest character that the world has ever seen. This is the only nation in the history of the planet that with unbelievable military superiority never occupies territory and only liberates people. So, to have the strongest military on the face of the planet, we have to know where to invest and where to reform. In the Defense Department, there's something called the tooth-to-tail ratio. Tooth, your son, fighting men, weapons, tools, material, tip of the spear, tooth, tail, bureaucracy in the Pentagon. And the Pentagon measures tooth to tail. And the truth is, the tooth to tail ratio is as bad as it's ever been in 40 years. So we must invest in tooth, honor tooth, value tooth, and we have to reform tail. Sir, you are the last question. No pressure.
Cybersecurity. About 8 weeks ago, I got a notification from the Veterans Administration. I was amongst the hat for the office of personnel manager. You know, all I am is a volunteer for the VA Medical Center. They did an FBI background check. I got to figure that goal left. God knows you can speak to it. How could we have them doing better helping me out? The original said it was only $4 million, and then FBI director said it was $10 million. Please address that. It's worrisome.
It's very worrisome. The question was about cybersecurity and the hack into the Office of Personnel Management, and your records were compromised. You've been notified. I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks that I chaired the advisory board of the Central Intelligence Agency for several years. And so I can tell you with certainty that we have known that the Chinese, among others, the Chinese, the Russians, the North Koreans, but let's start with the Chinese, have had a strategy over many years to hack into our most sensitive government databases and systems. This is sadly yet another example of government ineptitude. It's not that the Chinese are smarter than we are, they're not. It's not that they're more technologically sophisticated than we are, they're not by a long shot. I've been in China for decades, trust me. We have better technology than they do, but we didn't do the basic things. So if you go back and look at the Office of Personnel Data Breach, what you'll find is there was an Inspector General's report 3 or 4 months before that breach that warned the director of the Office of Personnel Management, you have vulnerabilities in your systems. And when I read those reports, I mean, basic things that have been going on in the private industry for years were not going on. They didn't have two-step authentication processes. There were holes, I mean, basic stuff. And guess what? It just never got fixed. It just never got fixed. It is ineptitude. It is why there has to be consequence for non-performance in the federal government. I'm sorry, when you do not do your job, there must be consequence. If you look at our cybersecurity efforts, what you'll see is a lot of different commands, a lot of different bureaucracies responsible for a lot of different pieces of it. But what you don't have is a centralized cyber command responsible for protecting all of our most sensitive databases. That is what I would do. I would probably put it either in the Pentagon or Homeland Security. You would have to centralize it so you don't have all of these turf battles going on between various agencies, which you know goes on. We would have to make sure that every database, every system is brought up to 21st century, 2016 standards, which, frankly, none of them are. For heaven's sakes, when we can't build a website for Obamacare, you can count on the fact that our government systems are way behind the times. All of those things need to be done, and it is why it's so important, honestly, that we have a president of the United States who, among other things, understands technology. Because it is a powerful tool, but it is also a powerful weapon. And this problem is yet another example of the fact that all of our problems can be solved. All of our wounds are self-inflicted. We're responsible for this data breach. We knew the Chinese were coming. We needed to do what was necessary. There's one other thing that has to happen. The bill has been languishing in Congress that allows the coordination of private sector and public sector networks so that these cyber attacks can be detected quickly and repelled quickly, and that bill still hasn't passed, and it needs to pass. But all of these things are within our control. Let me close, ladies and gentlemen, by saying this. It is easy. There are a lot of people who check out of the political process, and it's not because they don't care. It's because they think the system is so broken that they don't count. And it is easy to get really discouraged. Wow, we have a lot of problems. Wow, we've messed things up in so many ways, we're never going to be able to fix it. But of course we can fix it all. None of it actually is rocket science. But it does take leadership, and it takes citizenship. Every wound we have is self-inflicted from the division in this country, which comes from a politics of the left, of dividing people into groups and pitting one against another, to our failure to solve a data breach, to our lack of investment in the people we know we need to invest in because they are fighting for and caring for us. All of these things are self-inflicted. So I think to solve our problems, we need to remember who we are. Who are we? We are intended to be a citizen government. We were never intended to have a professional political class that went to Washington and just stayed forever. We were a nation built on the premise that leaders would step forward and serve their nation and then go back home. And so what we need now is leadership and citizenship. And I also believe that to think about what we must become, what we can become in the 21st century, we also need to remember who we are. So I'm going to ask you to remember what Lady Liberty and Lady Justice say about this nation. Because I think they tell us everything we need to know about who we are and who we can be. Think about Lady Liberty for a moment. She stands tall and strong, which is the way America must always be. She is clear-eyed and resolute. She doesn't shield her eyes from the realities of the world or the evils of the world. But she nevertheless faces out into the world, which is the way America must always face. And she holds her torch very high, because she knows she's a beacon of hope and a leader in a very troubled and dangerous world. and Lady Justice. Lady Justice holds a sword by her side because she's a fighter. She's a warrior for the values and the principles that have made this nation great. She holds a scale in her other hand. And with that scale, she reminds us, all of us, are equal in the eyes of God. Every life has potential and value, and so all of us must be equal in the eyes of the law and government, powerful and powerless. And she wears a blindfold. And with that blindfold, I think she is saying to us that it must be true, it can be true, that in this nation, in this century, it doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how you started. It doesn't matter your circumstances. Here in this nation, every American's life must be filled with the possibilities that come from their God-given gifts. And we must be one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. God bless you, ladies and gentlemen.